Okay, I'm in a really tough position because I'm representing three things that most of you are probably nervous about. The first is I represent, at the time I was in the United States Department of Defense, and now I'm in military research for NATO. So some people don't trust that. The second is I'm the first speaker after lunch, so that makes people always a little bit nervous. And then the third is I'm one of the few people here who come from the tie generation. Sorry, I'm just used to wearing a tie. I feel better that way. But I want to go over a couple of things. I'm going to start with two things off script. So we're talking about the future. And how do you blend the future into startups and where you're going? Well, I was reminded of two quotes yesterday, and I use these frequently. One was a guy by the name of Bill Gates. You all know Bill Gates? I'm making sure you're awake, because either you're going to go to sleep or I'm going to go to sleep, and either way it's a bad thing. So Bill Gates in 1981 said 640K ought to be enough for anybody. Had a little wrong, didn't he? Going back a little bit further, Thomas Watson, who founded IBM Corporation in 1948, said, I think there's maybe a worldwide market for 5 computers. So remember that as you go forward. There will always be people who will give you predictions about the future. A lot of them will be very, very wrong. So I'm going to talk about what military technology does. And I'm going to start with a very simple slide. I hope you can see this because I noticed today they're a little bit small. There's a number of products that people use every day that started from military research. And this is important. I've heard people say it's really hard to work with the Department of Defense, the government. It is, but there's tremendous payoff. So if you look at global positioning system and the commercial market that spurred, that came out of the Department of Defense. In fact, it started in 1973. The internet came from a DARPA product in the mid to late 60s. The first internet link transatlantic was from Washington, D.C. to Norway, and that was the precursor to the internet. Computers, the ENIAC computer, was created to solve defense problems by the Department of Defense. Microwave ovens. Okay, who would think that microwave ovens came out of defense research? But it did with the radar and the magnetron. You'll hear a lot about autonomous systems. I loved walking the floor out here today. You see the little robot running around. Autonomous systems and drones all came out of military research. And the military continues to invest very heavily in drones. And I'm going to get to that in just a couple of minutes. But now times are changing, and I'm going to go through that just a little bit because the areas the Department of Defense in the U.S. and in NATO are interested in are completely different. Now we're interested in things like artificial intelligence and cognitive research. Sounds a little strange, doesn't it? Artificial intelligence is what drives the robot generation, autonomy generation. Novel sensors, starting to unlock very small things such as quantum effects in atoms, can give you things like quantum key distribution, which is about a commercial product now. For those of you in the IT business who are worried about security, quantum key distribution came out of defense research. Now we're getting into things like quantum sensing that can do very, very precise underground mapping. Tremendous commercial business. And then finally, I've heard a lot of people here today talk about the problem of handling big data, decision-making, visual analytics. That all really came out of a need from the Ministries of Defense and Department of Defense to collate a tremendous amount of information and get to a decision very quickly. So there's been a long history of military research, early military research, spinning out to commercial firms and then becoming a very large market. So the market right now in things like computers, global positioning system, much larger in the commercial sector than it is in the Department of Defense, even though it's still very relevant for the military. Okay, there's no way you're going to be able to see this slide, so I apologize. Very quick point. Research goes along at its own pace, so you have to track research all the time. Products typically come out because of a need. So if you look at it, Radios came from military research back in the late 1890s. They really didn't go into the field until World War I. So it's triggering factors that allows maturation of products very quickly from the ministries and departments of defense. But there's a lot of things that are very viable and ripe for picking for commercial industry. And actually, from a government perspective, we really like it when small, innovative firms take some of the research and start to work on new products. That's the way things happen. That's the way things work. I was in Norway last week. Not a plug to anybody, so I won't mention the company. But this company took some research out of the Department of Defense, created a very small drone, can fit in the palm of your hand. Rotary wing, can fly for about 30 to 40 minutes with a camera embedded on front. They designed that for the military, for dismounted or ground forces to be able to see over the next hill. But when I think about the commercial product in protection of buildings, when I think about the commercial product in law enforcement, there's a massive, massive market out there. So I think it's very important for everybody to stay abreast of where the military is investing, especially in your basic and applied research, because product will come out. I was fortunate enough to run the United States Department of Defense research and engineering team for about 5 years. The things we're investing in now are not what you'd expect. People expected us to invest in things like airplanes, tanks, still do a little bit of that, but we did an awful lot in synthetic biology. We did a lot, as I mentioned, in quantum. We did a lot in decision making, and we did a lot in just large data handling. So there's an awful lot of opportunity, and hopefully these slides will stay behind. And the green boxes on your right are indicative of the areas that there's a large investment today. So what's changing? Why have we gone away from just the big planes? We've gone away from the big planes because now military capabilities are most important in the areas nobody owns. I call that the rise of the commons, and we've lost in the West some technological-based advantage due to the rise of the commons. Rise of the commons, nobody owns the electromagnetic spectrum, and yet you can't fight a modern war or any type of conflict or any type of employment of military force without sending folks out there and controlling the EM spectrum. You can't go out and control and do a successful operation without being able to operate freely in cyberspace. You can't do it nowadays without being able to operate a very good space layer of communications, GPS, and reconnaissance. So I think all of this is important. One thing is very troubling to me. We heard today from the guy who made the flying automobiles. I don't know who was here for that talk, but it was tremendous, about how important government research is. Okay, so this is a pretty ugly chart, but I think it's incredibly important for this audience, which is a technology-based audience, to take a look at. What I've done is taken the 20 largest countries from left to right for GDP. And then I calculated that nation's research and development investment, both government, academic, and commercial, as a percent of GDP. And it's a very troubling chart to me as someone who grew up both as a uniformed officer and as someone who's been in technology. When I was here in the 80s, living in Europe, Europe had the best research and development and innovative engine, along with the US. You'll notice now where the lead has gone to. The large bars that are striped red are non-NATO countries. The top research and development as a percentage of GDP now has shifted to Asia. It's China, Japan, South Korea, India. That's where a lot of innovation is going to come from. So I heard the guy with the flying airplane say that government R&D is very important. It is, but I implore all of you to get into a debate with your politicians about where their national priorities are. Because if you're not investing in research and development, then it's going to be very hard to be at the leading edge. And by the way, I had question marks for Poland. Poland's at about 1.5% and rising quickly. Okay, right now, looking at all these things, the U.S. has rolled out something called a third offset strategy. A lot of words behind that, but what it means is when you start to have a capability imbalance, you have to think about a different way to prosecute or conduct a war. And as the U.S. looked at it, the U.S. and the West had lost a lot of their technological advantage. So a lot of smart people got together and said, where's the future? And I'm not going to talk about things like speed of light weapons and standoff strike. I am going to talk about the most important thing within the United States Department of Defense for a future technology, and that's autonomous systems. Okay. Autonomy is, to the U.S. Department of Defense and to NATO country ministries of defense, the oncoming revolution. Again, you saw some of it out here. Autonomy has a lot of political issues that have to be worked out. I think within the West, we're very mindful of the fact that you need to have a human in the loop. But when you think about already the spin-offs coming from military investment into the autonomy field, you think about the Roomba, which does vacuuming of houses. You think about the small iRobot grass-cutting machine. Tremendous market. US DoD invested first in the company that came up with those, iRobot, but iRobot is so far past the DoD right now. We're just using their byproduct. That's okay. The ministries and the departments of defense want to use the byproduct of commercial research, and they have enough research and development in iRobot now to continue forward. We saw some discussions about autonomous cars, over 1 million miles driven by one company. Also, we have up here, research in autonomy will take a lot of research in cognitive science, it will take research in sensing, and it will take a lot of hands-on engineering. Last year, DARPA, who at that time worked for me, put on a robotic challenge to see if we could get an autonomous system that could deal with an event like Fukushima. Turns out we're not there yet, the nuclear disaster at Fukushima, Japan, because robots can't do simple functions like turning valves yet, but they will be able to very, very shortly. And if you look at autonomous system evolution, don't worry about the little pictures. It's not going to be a binary thing in the Department of Defense. We're not going to go from no autonomy to full autonomy immediately. Right now, you have autonomy in things that allow you to operate safely and efficiently. Minimum autonomy. Where we're heading is human-machine teaming. I would argue there's a tremendous market in the commercial market for that also. But if you think about when infantrymen go out now on a mission, they're carrying about 50 kilograms worth of equipment. If we could have a robot to carry a lot of that equipment, it will make our forces much more agile. When the French police responded to the terrorist attacks and capturing Abdel Salam in Saint-Denis, or actually killing him, the first thing to go into the apartment where the terrorist was holed up was a dog. That to me was a tragedy, because we had to send the living thing in first. Deputy Secretary of Defense in the U.S., Bob Work, says in 10 years, if we ever have that type of hostage or that type of situation, the first thing going in had better be a machine, not a living creature. I agree with him, and we're about there. So you look at the autonomous system evolution, and it will continue and will get more and more complex. And this will be driven by commercial industry. And commercial industry will have a tremendous market, I predict, in things like healthcare, housekeeping, those types of things. Technology dimensions of autonomy, it's not a single thread. It's not a single technology like we used to talk about. It's about system engineering in sensing, human factors, machine mobility, and information processing. And one of the themes that came out of this morning's talks is that the most important thing you can have with a startup, and I agree with this, is very good technical people given a hard problem. So we started talking about Bill Gates, talking about Tom Watson. I'm going to close by saying, as you get good technical people, give them a problem, don't over-constrain it, and let them design it. So we had some people today talk about Apple. Unfortunately, it was in Polish, so I didn't really understand it. Had it been German, great. French, great. But Polish, sorry. But how many people would consider the iPod to be a successful product? Only 3 of you? Had worldwide sales in the multi-hundreds of billions of dollars. iPod was successful. Steve Jobs gave his engineers 3 requirements only. 1 button, retrieve a song in 5 seconds, hold 10,000 seconds. The engineers did the rest, and that's where entrepreneurship comes from. Small set of requirements, know where you want to go, let the engineers go to work, use technology from the ministries of defense, and I think that with that, I'm at my 15-minute point. Have a great time. This is an incredible event, and thank you very much.